Chapter 26. Mateo stared out at the churning ocean as night descended. His jaw felt tight and his teeth ached. He realized he'd been grinding them together as his mind wandered to the battle ahead. Less than 2 weeks. He shook that thought off. With Vittoria visiting her family for the night, the house had been quiet. Even if she didn't speak much when she was here, her presence had a way of filling the space so it didn't feel so cavernous. His mind wandered down darker paths whenever she was gone. His lips twitched, however, when he thought of Nico. Give the kid a few years, and his natural drive and curiosity would keep Vittoria's hands full. No, their hands full. Chuckling to himself, Mateo turned. A message appeared in front of him. Balta's handwriting. He reached for it just as heavy boots issued from the front door, and Banat called out,
"Mateo, are you ready for your training session?"
But Mateo only vaguely heard him over the sudden roar of his heart in his ears. Heat rushed to his face while everything else inside him turned cold. In moments, he felt like a glacier had carved a chunk out of him and left him frozen and half-empty in its wake.
"Mateo, I suggest you come to the castle. Hodei is on his deathbed. Balta."
Mateo vaguely registered Banat's form in the doorway as he read the message twice, then a third time. The words finally sank in. His hand dropped to the side.
"Mateo?"
He glanced up. Banat eyed him with concern.
"Are you all right?"
Wordlessly, Mateo passed the note over. Banat skimmed it, then let out a long breath.
"You must go." "Must I?"
The thought startled Mateo. He didn't have to go anywhere. Hodei didn't deserve any sort of absolution, nor would he seek it. Still, the thought of Pear dying without something said sat like a lead ball in his stomach. He had no chance to part with Mare, and that had haunted him for years. He held no love for Hodei, but he didn't want to wonder later. Mateo nodded.
"I will go, now."
He hesitated only a moment more to gather his thoughts, to rein in his emotions. The strange sense of calm and chaos surprised him. More than losing his only parent, and one who had attempted to kill him several times. Hodei's death would mean an acceleration of the final battle of the law of rights. The battle with Romeo would happen immediately, within a day. Perhaps this was the beginning of the end. With a shake of his head, Mateo pushed those thoughts aside. He'd think through the implications later. For now, he would visit Pear. Mateo stood in the doorway of a shadowy room. Hodei's rooms occupied the entire top floor of the west wing of the castle. Most of them were reportedly empty. Maids cleaned their skeleton interiors once a month to wipe away the dust and cobwebs, but no one ever visited them. Not even Hodei, according to rumors. Not since Mare died. How like Hodei to take up space he never used, all while children died of hunger and cold in his network. Mateo ignored the empty places and the ghosts of memories as he walked past. He had lived here once. Grown up here, taken his first steps in this castle. He barely remembered those days. Mostly flashes of white marble, glittering chandeliers, flutes and drums from the ballroom, and a stoic pair who spoke little. No one stopped him as he advanced. Perhaps Balta had prepared them. The guardians glanced at him, but made no move to prevent his entry to Hodei's private quarters. Mateo pushed the door open, allowing torchlight from the hallway to spill inside. Deep, raspy breaths filled the room. The only sound except for the occasional shuffle of a worker in the distance. The air smelled stuffy, with a lingering hint of eucalyptus. A salve for his chest, perhaps. Mateo stood there for too long, expecting Hodei to snap at him to shut the door. He wanted to move forward, but his legs wouldn't take him there. No one else lingered in the room. It lay, still as death and just as dark, in Hodei's final moments. He wondered if Balta had even come up, or just passed along the news. Mateo's thoughts skipped around, unable to settle on, or accept, the shriveled old man on the mattress. Where was Romeo? Why hadn't Romeo written to him? A wistful, foolish thought. Romeo didn't care about Mateo, and he certainly didn't care about Hodei. Would it have been better if Hodei had just slipped away in the night, with no one at his side? No one to ease his passing into the oblivion that surely awaited him? Not even honor would accept Hodei. Landowners believed the next step after death was the interim, the place in between where witches go to be judged by their honor in life. Honor, a vague cloud, a sense, not even a being, just an intuition that would grant them their just due, to be weighed worthy of moving to their next life, and if so, whether that life would be better or worse. But even if honor were the judge, Surely it would not grant Hodei another life. No, Hodei had left nothing good behind. So, this life would be his last, the final breath, the ultima mor, last death. Mateo advanced into the room with cautious steps, but left the door to the hallway open. A sprawling bed, large enough for all of Vittoria's family to lie side by side and still have space, swamped the middle of the room. It would have been a warm, inviting place if Hodei had any sense of warmth himself. Instead, the wooden panels, marble floor, and flickering candles took on a grim appearance, as if death had already arrived but was waiting for something. No fresh air drifted off the sea. Heavy damask curtains shut out the world. Not even a painting cheered up the walls. And, on the massive bed, lay that bent body. Mateo stopped, not far from where Hodei curled in on himself, half alive. His breaths were intermittent, labored, as if he scrounged for air from inside his chest. A rush of pity took Mateo by surprise. The great Hodei had been toppled by his own body. Now one of his sons would ascend his throne, and he wouldn't know which. He could be erased from the timeline of history, or remembered as the tyrant who lost his power at the end of his days. Whatever he meant to achieve by his reign of terror would never be realized, because Hodei had never been satisfied. No power was enough. No sacrifice was enough. No amount of currency could buy whatever it was he sought. And now, he would end instead.
You,
came the raspy voice,
are the last witch I expected to see in my final moments.
On instinct, Mateo almost retreated, but he tucked his hands into his pockets and forced himself to stay. Hodei's eyes remained closed. He panted in between the words and struggled to regain breath.
I thought she'd come,
Hodei gasped.
Taunt me from death. Mer?
Hodei coughed, a weak, gurgling sound. His eyes remained closed as he sought another breath.
Balta told me you were dying.
Mateo shifted his weight.
I came after I received his message. I am,
Hodei snarled. Mateo said nothing. One of Hodei's eyes fluttered open, then closed again. He lay on his side, face pressed into a pillow where spittle dribbled every now and then. A blanket covered half of his body. The skin of his arms had turned pale, and his fingertips were tinged blue in his clawed hands.
You always thought I was your enemy,
Hodei said. He managed one word at a time, each wrenched from a breathless, air-starved body.
It wasn't me.
Mateo's brow wrinkled.
Per, you have enslaved half of our network. You've killed thousands in the name of prosperity. I said your enemy.
The emphasis sent a chill through Mateo. Of course Per had been his enemy. He'd sent assassins. He'd taken Romeo, abandoned Mare, ignored him. Hodei coughed again, but it was a petulant wheeze at best, followed by several minutes of agonized panting. Mateo sought for words, but found none. He'd dreamed of this moment for years, the blistering words he'd say to Hodei in exchange for the years of fear, the agony of rejection, the loneliness and uncertainty. Now, he had nothing to say. A dreadful sort of numbness had replaced the emotions of the last 10 years. He leaned into the emotional reprieve, certain this would hurt in excruciating ways later when he had time to think about what he should have said. Hodei forced both of his eyes open.
The assassins, not mine.
Mateo crouched down, barely able to hear the words. Surely he'd heard wrong. At any rate, Hodei must be half delusional at this point, so hungry for breath.
They were guardians, Per. All 3 attempts.
Hodei shook his head, a pathetic back and forth that should have been a twitch.
Not mine. Don't be a fool.
Then who?
Her.
Who? Hodei tried to swallow, but it sent him into another pitiful coughing bout. His eyes closed. The heavy, frantic breaths calmed in 10 seconds of total stasis. For a second, Mateo thought he had passed, but then Hodei gasped in another ragged breath. His eyes rolled back in his head. He wasn't dead, but likely wasn't conscious either. Mateo stumbled back. A deathbed hallucination, certainly. Even so, his mind chewed on the thought. If Hodei hadn't sent the assassins, then who had? Mateo sank into a nearby chair, his mind awash with hazy memories. The first attempt had been the day after Mare's death, right when he'd awoken from his fever. Balta had shaken him out of his half-delirious stupor and forced him to leave, mere minutes before the assassins arrived. The second had been years later, just after he'd returned from his time in the Navy, while he was walking through Necci. And the third was after La Salvatore had made a name for himself. All of the would-be murderers had worn Guardian uniforms. They'd been better trained than the average Guardian, of course. His mind stuttered to a stop. Or were they Guardians? Why would an assassin wear the uniform? It would be very conspicuous of them. Mateo felt sick to his stomach as he turned to look back at Pear. What if Hodei was telling the truth? What if this wasn't some delusion of his dying mind? If not him, then who? Her. Agonized breaths shuddered out of Pear now. His hand, curled until the fingers pressed into each other, rested on the pillow next to him. His dry, pale lips gaped open, and a long, cold breath escaped him. Mateo stared at his bent body, his own breath held, and waited for Hodei to gasp again. The muscles around Hodei's shoulders slackened, his face drooped. No breaths came. The High Priest was dead. The final battle of the Law of Rights would have to take place as soon as possible, before the world found out, and before the Civil War began.
"Whoever tried to kill me,"
Mateo whispered.
"You certainly didn't stop them."
With that, he tucked all the strange emotions farther into his mind, shut them there, and transported back home.